What I want to bring up is like, how does that happen? And how do we get into this state where that's possible? And one of the first things that they do when you join the military is they say, you know what, you are no longer, you know, Aaron Hughes, you're property of the government. Like, that's the way, the mythology, that's what's presented to us as service members. And as they like erode your civil rights, they also erode your human rights, and they also erode your own humanity, to the point where you're easily able to look at another human being and not see them as a human being, but as a target in your rangefinder. And that's what you're trained. You're trained to muscle reaction, right? Our kill rate has increased because we're not trained by how well you can shoot. You're trained how well you can take down a silhouette based in numbers of seconds. That's how you're trained now. It's a completely different style of training, because during the Vietnam War, people would misfire intentionally because they didn't want to shoot another human being, because that's a natural human thing. It's killing another human being is outside of the norm. It's outside of what's perpetuated as us as humanity. And as those things are taken, you know, the perception is that we take these individuals' civil rights and we take their human rights, but the reality is service members are citizens of the United States, and they do fall underneath the Constitution, and they do have civil rights. And a part of our organization is fighting to acknowledge that human right and those civil rights. Something that the military continues to override and continues to put a stigma around individuals that are pursuing those rights. And we're doing that through the frame of Operation Recovery. And what Operation Recovery is a campaign to stop the deployment of traumatized troops and win service members and veterans' right to heal. Currently, 20 to 50% of individuals that are getting deployed have already been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, some other form of trauma. And according to the DoD's own laws, this is they're not supposed to deploy those individuals. They're supposed to get on a medical discharge and get out with their disability. That's what's supposed to happen if you're disabled within the military. If you maybe want to pass that one back and this one back for me. And I'm going to ask folks to read some of those for me. Maybe we can start, I don't know, you want to start real quick and just read that one really loud for me?
Sure. U.S. female soldiers in Iraq are more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than killed by an enemy. And this is from the Guardian article, Rape Shame in the U.S. Military, which Fox News quoted as false.
And if you could read the rest of it.
Believe and support survivors of military sexual trauma.
Yeah, so right now, 1/3 of all women that serve in the military report sexual assault, and that's reported cases of sexual assault. And 48% of individuals that report sexual assault are males. Would you mind reading the one that you have in your hand? Yeah, and maybe showing it to folks after you read it.
Sure. You can't just say there is help for those that ask when you know that less than 15% of survivors report sexual assault in the military. That's why it took me 5 years to admit I had been raped. And then it says there's a cultural problem in the military, and the quote is from Maggie Martin.
She's a field organizer for Iraq Veterans in Zor. Brother, you have that one. Would you mind reading that one and sharing that with Susan Swift on it?
Okay. To stop sexual assault in the military, and it's a quote from her. It said, I said, I can't do it, I can't go. I looked at my mom and told her I can't go. And she said, seriously? I just felt, my heart was pounding and I felt like I was just frozen. I think I kind of stuttered when I said I can't do it. It was hard to get the words out. And that was from Suzanne Swift. That was her decision to go AWAW before her redeployment to Iraq.
You want to read the rest of that?
Where she had been sexually assaulted by 3 men in her command. She was apprehended and imprisoned briefly in January of 2007. She remained on active duty until 2009 and has been active in anti-war and anti-rape protests.
In the last part?
1/3 of women in the military are sexually assaulted. The military has diagnosed this as a military sexual trauma. According to the VA, more than 48,000 female veterans screened positive for military sexual trauma in 2008.
So because she didn't want to go, she didn't want, if anyone here in this school has sexually harassed anyone in this school, and then you are expected to continue to go to school with that individual, I mean, does that make any sense? So she's expected, she was sexually assaulted by her commanders, by an individual in her command, and told that if she doesn't deploy, she's going to have to go AWOL. She goes AWOL, she serves time in jail, because she doesn't want to serve time overseas with these individuals that have sexually assaulted her. I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. And it doesn't just stop there. You have one right there. You want to read that out loud real quick? The one that you have?
This one?
Yeah.
20 to 50% of all U.S. military service members deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder.
And you want to read the one that you have up here?
It's a quote from Hannah Frisch, if I'm getting her last name right, clinical psychologist who diagnosed the individual she's speaking about with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. Her quote is, "Here's a young man, a combat veteran who has clearly sacrificed a great deal for his country. It appalls me that they are treating him like a criminal when he needs mental help."
So Eugene Scher was a combat medic with the 10th Mountain. He's a good friend of mine. And EOD didn't clear a town before they blew up a car bomb that they had, a car that was filled with explosives that they had identified. And after they blew up that car, it had obviously affected the neighborhood around it and killed a bunch of civilians. And so his job was to go in and pick up the body parts. And that's something that he has to live with and has continued to have memories about every single day. And he didn't want to redeploy because he needed mental health support. And because of that, he was up against charges when they refused to treat him. And you'll hear more stories about individuals that have asked for support, asked for mental health support, asked for counseling, and been denied, or been given medication and told, like, get back in the field. And this is a reality within our military when we don't have a draft where everyone's up to deployment. So this war affects so few people. And you know, I served 15 months in a tour, but most service members, an average Army soldier now has done 3 tours, and a lot of people we know have now done 5 to 6 tours. You know, that these folks are not coming back. They will never be able to, never be the same. You know, I'm not the same person I was before I left, let alone. And these are part of larger systemic issues of patriarchy. Maybe you want to read the one that you got with Rodney Watson.
I'd rather do my time in jail than be a party to the racism I saw in Iraq. As an African American, I grew up with racism, but in Iraq I saw the same kind of abuse and mistreatment, only this was U.S. enlisted soldiers and American contractors, like security forces, abusing Iraqis.
Yeah, so, you know, the whole time I was over there, we didn't call Iraqis Iraqis, we called them Hajis. And we also called the third country nationals Hajis. And when, during the Vietnam War, we didn't call Vietnamese, we called them Gooks. I mean, when we were in we were fighting the Germans, we called them Krauts. It's a process of dehumanization. You gotta dehumanize your enemy. As you dehumanize your enemy, you dehumanize yourself. Would you mind reading yours that you have over there?
Sure. It says, if on 9/11 I did not have the freedom to hug my girlfriend goodbye before we left as a unit for New York City, then what freedom was I protecting? What freedom could we offer to the world if we treat it so restrictively based on who a person falls in love with? And that's from Jen Hogg, The Winter Soldier, 2008.
So, as you can see, this is the beginning of these issues. And right now, we're using the legal structure of the military to hold the military accountable. And that's not even before people become veterans. You know, it's not even dealing with the veterans crisis and why veterans are having such a hard time getting jobs, finding stable employment, finding a home, all these things that we know are going on, the crisis that we know is going on. The military is structured legally, so just so you guys are aware. So your commander can write command policies. You're legally accountable to them. Those command policies have to follow underneath your base commander or your corps commander based on where you're at, right? Those are base policies or core policies that you're legally bound to. Those policies legally are accountable to the DoD directives that come from the executive branch of the government. The executive branch is accountable to the UMCJ, which Congress produces. Congress is accountable, and the UCMJ is accountable to the Constitution, which the Supreme Court oversees. For us, we're starting at the bottom. We're starting where General Campbell at Fort Hood knows and has written base policies on the stigma and on, right now, service members, if you're diagnosed, if you broke your leg, if you're diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, your commander can look at you and say your leg's not broken, or you don't have post-traumatic stress disorder, get back in the field. He has the legal right to do that. On At Fort Hood, General Campbell's written a base policy that says that's not true, and that commanders have to follow an individual's profile. So when a doctor says like this is an issue, the command has to live up to that. A lot of the commanders aren't doing that, and General Campbell's not holding his own command accountable, because that would actually show that he's not accountable to the number of service members. I mean, 20 to 50% of the military is already dealing with these issues. You take out 20 to 50% of the military, we're not in these wars anymore. End of story. And I think that that's where we're coming at, and that's where we're trying to expose, is the hypocrisies and the fact that as you go in the military, the idea is that they take your civil rights and that you don't have constitutional rights anymore, but the reality is you do. You're still a citizen of the United States, and you do have constitutional rights. And that's what we're hoping folks like you can help us with. Jacob, you want to more about semi-personal stuff? Let's talk about.
Why don't you give me that phone number?
Oh yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. Well, maybe you could either talk about Operation Recovery, or maybe how Iraq veterans against the war and other anti-war movements tie into things like Occupy, or what happened in Madison, or the upcoming election. Right?
I'm going to let Sarah cover those topics, but I will speak about just a little bit about the law and what it's like to sort of live within this UCMJ, and to, I think a lot of people, it's hard to understand what it's like to be so vulnerable within a system and have no advocate. You have a lot of authority, and they're technically your advocate, but it's really difficult to be both, and that's why, if there's one overriding theme to the military, it's domination and subordination. And I think that is this sort of feeling of being coerced is why it makes me think of, they say rape isn't about sexual attraction or something, and because there's a huge military sexual trauma problem with rape in the military, for males as well as females. And they say rape is about control. And to me, that when I read that Time magazine article, it made perfect sense, because the whole time you feel like you have no control. Like you're like a ping pong in a sewer flood, because the system is in charge of you. And it makes sense that people are acting out in such horrible and cruel ways, like just happened over the weekend, or even other ways. And that's what I was thinking as we were talking about the posters and all that.
Yeah. Do you think that like military fetishism, or I think we've talked about that before, the idea that America puts their troops on a pedestal, that they always do right, and that whenever they do commit atrocities like that, that we need to close ranks and follow behind them and support them or try to get them exonerated. How do you think that plays into, I guess, the continuance of these kinds of practices, or the continuing dehumanization of our troops?
Well, I think that society has a very strong hesitancy to scrutinize them, because they fear, they don't feel like they're entitled to criticize soldiers as they've never been in their situation. Whereas I would say they need support as well as scrutiny, because they're in a very difficult position, and I guess what I'm trying to say is they do need to be controlled by society, and because they are committing a lot of atrocities, and when the troops commit atrocities, it's something that needs to be talked about, not covered up.
And it doesn't start, in every single one of these cases, an enlisted individual that's been held accountable. No officers have been held accountable. I couldn't take a shit without my officer knowing when I was deployed. I mean, there's no way that we are not holding the officer corps accountable for these things. And to say that that officer isn't accountable to their officer, I mean, we need to be starting at the top of this system, not the bottom of this system. These atrocities aren't coming from the bottom. They're being pushed down. And their policy, we pretend like this coin policy, this new counterinsurgency doctrine, is new. It's what we did in South and Central America. And we can look at the atrocities that came out of that and what happened there and pretend like, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. But the reality is the coin doctrine has promoted those atrocities. And so the question is like, okay, well then who's accountable? And if they don't know that, then that, like they're either like extremely ignorant and don't know anything, and they shouldn't be in command, or that they intentionally did this and set people up for failure, and they just don't want to be held accountable.